A security guard stopped a black teenager at the library, accusing him without cause, unaware that he was facing the mayor's son. A crowd gathered, police arrived, and the teenager's world turned upside down. What happened next shocked everyone. But let's start at the beginning. Mark Samuels, a 16-year-old black teenager, confidently walked toward the library with a laptop and folder in hand. His eyes were focused. He had an important school project to complete. The streets were empty, and the library looked calm and welcoming. Mark had known this place since childhood, but this morning would bring an unexpected turn. At the entrance, he was stopped by Mike Reed, a burly middle-aged security guard in a dark blue uniform. Mike's gaze lingered on Mark longer than necessary, as he blocked the doorway with his imposing figure. "Where do you think you're going?" Mike snapped, crossing his arms over his chest. Mark froze, surprised by the hostile tone. "To the library. I need to work on a project," he answered calmly, trying not to let the tension affect him. "There's no loitering here," Mike retorted sharply. "I know you're not here for the books." Mark frowned, but decided to stay polite. He pulled out his library card and extended it toward Mike. "I have a library membership. I come here regularly." Mike snatched the card, glanced at it dismissively, and scoffed. "So what? That proves nothing. You're definitely up to something." "Excuse me, but you have no reason to stop me," Mark replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have every right to be here." But Mike wasn't backing down. His voice grew louder, drawing the attention of others nearby. People started pausing to watch the confrontation. A woman in the crowd took out her phone and began recording. "Either you turn around and leave right now, or I'm calling the police," Mike threatened, raising his radio. Mark stood firm, controlling his rising anger despite the growing humiliation. He knew that anything he said could be used against him. The crowd began murmuring among themselves, discussing the security guard's behavior. An older woman shook her head disapprovingly. "I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not leaving," Mark declared, meeting Mike's gaze. "Fine, then wait here," Mike barked, pressing the call button on his radio. "We'll sort this out now." Mark felt anger bubbling in his chest. He couldn't understand why his lawful presence at the library had suddenly become a reason to call the police. People around him were filming the incident, and some even tried to intervene, but Mike loudly ordered them to step back. Mark stood tall, refusing to retreat. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up in front of the library. 2 officers stepped out. Sergeant Hanks, a tall middle-aged man with sharp features, and Officer Green, a young black man with a thoughtful expression. They approached the scene cautiously, taking in the situation. "There he is!" Mike exclaimed, pointing at Mark, his irritation barely contained. "This kid refused to leave. His documents are probably fake." Mark took a deep breath, striving to remain calm. He met Officer Green's eyes, hoping the officer would be willing to listen to reason. "My name is Mark Samuels," he began evenly. "I'm here to work on a school project. I have a library card. I haven't broken any rules." Officer Green raised an eyebrow and turned to Mike. "Did he show you identification?" Green asked. "He did, but I'm sure it's fake," Mike replied firmly. Sergeant Hanks stepped forward, scrutinizing Mark with suspicion. "Let me see your ID again," Hanks demanded. Without a word, Mark handed over his card. Green examined it closely before checking the details on his tablet. After a moment, he nodded. "The ID is legitimate," Green said calmly, returning the card. "But he's still acting suspicious," Mike insisted. "This isn't a place for, you know." The onlookers began murmuring louder. Several were recording the scene on their phones. A young woman in the crowd shouted, "He's just a teenager! Why are you treating him like this?" Mike ignored her, his anger escalating. "Sir," Green said, addressing Mike, "he hasn't broken any rules. We can't force him to leave." Mike's face turned red with frustration. "So, you're not going to do anything?" he shouted. "This is ridiculous." Sergeant Hanks stepped closer to Mark, his expression still stern. "If you're here legitimately, why argue? Why not just leave when asked?" Mark held his ground, locking eyes with Hanks. Because I have a right to be here, he said firmly. I'm tired of being treated unfairly because of my skin color. The crowd erupted into applause, showing their support for Mark. Green shot a reproachful glance at both Hanks and Mike. I think we've done enough here, Green said quietly to Hanks. There's no crime. But before the officers could leave, a black car pulled up in front of the library. The crowd parted, and a man in a sharp suit stepped out. His confident stride and commanding presence immediately captured everyone's attention. What's going on here? The man asked loudly. Everyone fell silent. Mark turned to the man, his expression shifting to one of surprise. He recognized him instantly. It was his father, the mayor, John Samuels. John Samuels strode through the crowd, his confident gaze sweeping over those gathered. Mike froze, recognizing the man whose face often appeared on the news. The police officers stiffened, sensing the situation slipping out of their control. This is your son? Hanks asked, stepping back in surprise. Yes, this is my son, John replied firmly, stopping beside Mark and placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And as I understand, you're trying to accuse him of something he didn't do. Mike scrambled to defend himself. Mr. Samuels, this is just a misunderstanding. This boy refused to comply, and I was just following protocol. Following protocol? John raised an eyebrow, his voice calm but laced with an unmistakable threat. Your protocol seems based on assumptions and bias. You checked his documents and they're valid. Why are you still harassing him? Mike turned crimson, unable to find the words. Sergeant Hanks tried to step in. We're here to maintain order, sir. We were just doing our job. Your job, John interrupted sharply, is to protect the rights of citizens, not humiliate a teenager who's done nothing wrong. He turned to the crowd. Did anyone record this? A young woman in the crowd raised her phone. I have it all on video, Mr. Mayor. This guard and the police treated him like a criminal for no reason. John nodded, his expression calm but resolute. Good. That video will serve as evidence of the systemic bias I've spoken about so often. I'll make sure the entire city knows about this. The crowd buzzed with approval. People began cheering for the mayor, while the officers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the situation had spiraled beyond their control. Sir, we truly apologize if this caused any misunderstanding, Green said, his voice sincere. We just wanted to ensure everything was in order. Everything is in order? John repeated, tilting his head. Then you have no further business here. And you, he said, turning to Mike, will be held accountable for your actions. Consider yourself officially out of a job. Mark looked at his father with gratitude. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering for the mayor. John looked at his son and said quietly, Let's go, Mark. We've got work to do, but I'm proud of you for standing your ground. As they walked toward their car, the crowd parted for them, their gazes filled with admiration. Mark felt a sense of justice being restored, but knew the fight for real change had only begun. The next day, footage of the incident spread across social media. Thousands of views, comments, and discussions ignited a wave of outrage. The city was abuzz with talk of racial discrimination, and Mark Samuels' name became a symbol of resistance against injustice. A local news station invited John Samuels for an interview. Wearing a sharp suit, he spoke with conviction. This isn't just about one instance of bias against a teenager. It's about how we build our community. We cannot allow prejudice to dictate who deserves respect. I promise this incident will not go unanswered. Meanwhile, Mike Reed, the library guard, faced the fallout of his actions. Under pressure from the public, the library administration announced his termination. In an official statement, they said, "We condemn any form of discrimination. We are committed to conducting training for our staff to ensure incidents like this do not occur again." Back at school, Mark felt the shift. Classmates approached him with words of support. Teachers praised his resilience. Even those who had previously overlooked him now paid attention. But Mark remained focused. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with his father. John placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You did more than stand up for your rights," John said. You inspired people to reflect. That's the first step toward change." Mark nodded, understanding the gravity of what had happened. He looked at his father and said with confidence, "I'm not stopping here. This is just the beginning." At the next city council meeting, John introduced an initiative to establish a commission to combat discrimination in public institutions. The proposal was met with thunderous applause. Mark sat in the front row, watching his father with pride. The story of the Samuels family became more than a tale of standing up for justice. It became the start of meaningful change in their community. People began speaking openly about the issues, and that gave hope for a brighter future.